Welcome back to Formula One Focus. Hendrik is here to chat about the Mexican Grand Prix and all the action. And was there a lot of action this weekend? Welcome back, Hendrik.
Yes, absolutely. It was one of those interesting races. It's not often that we see a very exciting Mexico City Grand Prix, but this certainly was one of them.
Yeah, well, the action started right at the first corner, and our old friend Yuki Tsunoda just cannot get past turn one. He seems to have a bit of a mental block of that one. And Alex Albon was caught in it now. I wonder, Yuki, we thought he might have grown up a little bit. We'll get to the rest of the race just now, but he seems to not just, for me, he can't take that next step up to be a really serious Formula One driver.
Yeah, I think that's also one of the reasons why Red Bull as a team are a little bit reluctant to be too open about his chances of taking over that seat next year or even the year after. That Yuki could be quick, but he's volatile. And he's got a volatile nature and he's got a volatile style of racing. And often the red mist just comes down. I mean, he was in a situation there where you can't have three cars going into one corner. Somebody's got to give. Poor old Alex was in the middle. Yuki tried to squeeze him, and I forget who was on the inside.
Gasly.
Pierre Gasly, that's right. And so the result was inevitable.
Yeah. Well, yes, before we move on, here's my thinking. I think Yuki Tsunoda is going to end up in Aston Martin in 2026 because Honda's moving to Aston Martin, and he's got a long relationship with Honda. I'm just putting it out there. In a year's time, we'll revisit this prediction of mine.
Well, that will depend on how long Fernando wants to stay on. If he's going to stay on, he's going to stay there. There's no way they're going to fire him for Yuki. And of course, young Stroll is there, and I think he's got a guaranteed seat. So that depends on whether Lawrence, the father, decides to fire his son. Nothing is impossible. At this point, I can't see that happening.
Yeah, but Fernando was making noises that he's getting tired. He had his 400th Grand Prix this weekend. I mean, that is a lot. That's more than a race a day for more than a year. I mean, that's hectic if you think about it.
Yeah, well, for 24 years, that's quite a substantial career in Formula One, to put it very mildly.
Right, let's move on to the main talking point of this race, and it wasn't the fact that Carlos Sainz won the race. It was the fact that Max was up to his old antics again, and turn 4 and turn 7, cost him a total of 20 seconds in penalties, and he was sort of nonchalant about it, as if he was sort of expecting it and more than happy to accept it because it prevented Lando from scoring more points. What's your thoughts on that entire situation?
Yeah, I think Max is now, hopefully starting to realize that he can't get away with what he used to get away with in the past. He still could get away with it in Austin, and we discussed that last week. He tried it again this weekend, except in Mexico City, but this was different, and it was different in the sense that in both instances, both turn 4 and turn 7, Lando had the clear lead. He was ahead of him in both of those corners, and Max still went ahead. And pushed him off. The turn 7 was absolutely blatant.
Yeah,
there's no question about that. You just simply drove straight on. So Max has now been penalized, quite rightly so, and I think that's exactly the point that everybody wants to make. And as he said, let's stop this nonsense. We're not in a race. Somebody put it nicely, and I can't quite remember who did it, but I quite agree with it. We don't want to see the driver win the races or the championship that is the most robust. Let's put it that way. You want to see the fastest one, but you want to see the fastest and the best driver win legitimately. You don't, it's not a demolition derby, Formula One. You don't get to just push your opposition off the line, off the track, and get away with it. Excuse me. And I think that's exactly the point about the difference between what happened in Austin a week ago and what happened in Mexico City. What is the difference between those two moves? Well, in the Austin case, Lando wasn't ahead of Max, so Max was defending. He defended illegally, in my view, as I said last week, but he got away with it. In this case, in Mexico City, in both corners, Lando Norris was ahead. He was clearly ahead into turn 4. He was also clearly ahead going into turn 7. And on both occasions, Max just basically drove straight on and pushed him off. Max didn't leave the circuit in turn 4, so that's maybe a little bit more I don't know, 70-30, but certainly turn 7, he just drove straight on, also left the circuit, and Lando had nowhere to go. So in both cases, it was Max just simply, trying to push off his opposition, and he did it against Lando. He didn't do it as blatantly or as seriously with Carlos Sainz earlier on. So clearly, he knows that Norris is his main opposition for the championship, and he's going to treat him differently to anybody else. Max, I think, knew that he wasn't in a position to win this race. He didn't have everything at his disposal. He mentioned it afterwards also. He said that he's being pushed into these situations because the car is not performing. And Christian Horner took up the same defense. Tried to show afterwards that Lando was from Lando's information, he wasn't going to make the corner into turn 4. That turned out not to be true, because he was doing this exactly the same and did make the corner on other occasions. And I think he also said afterwards that his son wasn't able to, or isn't able to compete, so therefore that forces him into a situation where he has to be as rough as he is. I don't think that's an excuse. The fact of the matter is that Max did not have an optimum engine or power unit for this weekend. He had lots of trouble with the engine and the power unit over the free practice on Friday. And they had to change the engine, and the engine that they did put in for him was from his own pool, but that engine was already had a high mileage on. And so therefore, they never intended to use that engine in a race, but they had no choice. They were only intending to use that engine during practice sessions, but they had no choice. They had to put that engine in for him, and therefore he was down on power. But I don't think that's an excuse at all. You cannot say, just because I'm down on power, now I've got the right to muscle my way around and muscle people out of the way. And essentially, try to intimidate people. So no, I think it was absolutely right, and I think that the stewards have now finally come to the point where they said enough is enough. As Zach Brown said afterwards, enough is enough. Let's draw the line, and from here on, we don't allow this. And it happens to be Max. I'm not anti-Max Verstappen at all. I mean, the guy is an incredible racing driver. He's an incredibly talented driver. He's a deserving 3-time world champion. He's well on his way to a deserved 4th title this year. If he does do it, and it's not impossible, he can do it because he's leading and he's not giving away a lot of points on every occasion. It will be well deserved. But then, his reputation is at risk of being tainted. Similar, I think, to drivers like Ayrton Senna, for instance, and Michael Schumacher. Both of them were uncompromising. Were willing to push the envelope, as they say, or push the rules to their utmost, and sometimes overstep the line. There are a number of occasions where both of them did it, and Max is in the same mold. He's absolutely non-compromising. Some people like that. I don't like it. I like it if somebody is a hard racer, is a good racer, and doesn't take any nonsense and doesn't give up a position easily, but still within the rules and in a sporting way. That's what the whole thing is all about. Any idiot can go straight in a corner and force his opposition on the outside, out of the track, off the circuit. That is not clever at all. That is not good racing at all. As I said last weekend, yes, you can ease your opposition going around the outside off the circuit, but stay inside the circuit yourself. So as far as I'm concerned, if both drivers can stay inside the corners, inside the lines, then they can fight as hard as they possibly want to.
The one other thing that was different in Mexico than it was in Austin is the stewards. Derek Warwick was the main steward in Austin, and Johnny Herbert was a steward in Mexico. And that brings back to the issue of maybe they should have a certain steward present at all races so you can have more consistency in your decision making. Because, like you said, there might have been a couple of differences. McLaren felt still so strong about the fact that they thought Lando was actually ahead in Austin that they lodged an appeal, which was subsequently dismissed because it wasn't new and relevant information. But the point was, you mentioned before that Lando and Max was ahead in Austin. McLaren begs to differ. They don't have forward camera for Max. That made a bit of a difference, I think, in terms of the appeal. But the point is, don't you think there's a call now or a necessity for so call it a chief steward, whatever, that one that can attend all the races, make all the decisions, so you have a certain standard of racing that people can get used to and apply?
Well, two things about that. It has been tried in the past and it didn't work. So that's the first thing. They did have a permanent steward for many years. And again, you did not have consistency because he's one of a panel of three. So, he can maybe be consistent, but the other two can vote against him. So you either have, the majority of the panel as permanent stewards. So in other words, they have to travel to all 24 races. And that's my second point. You've got to find people that are willing to travel to all 24 races. Otherwise, what's the point? You can't have somebody who's permanently there, but not permanent. So it's not a practical solution. The practical solution, to my mind, is to be clear, or for the driving or the racing guidelines to be clear and to be accepted by everybody. And I think what you probably need to do, what they are going to do, they're going to revisit the current guidelines. They are not part of the sporting regulations, which I think I said last week they should be. We as the public do not have any insight into those driving guidelines. It's simply guidelines that are given to the stewards to work around or to work with. So those guidelines, I think, needs to be tightened up, and something like dive bombing your opposition off the circuit and going off the circuit at the same time should be not allowed. I think it should be part of the sporting regulations. So therefore, it should be made public. And there should be very little ambiguity. Again, you cannot have absolute ambiguity because every situation does differ from the other one. But I think if you have a broad guideline, for instance, something like when two drivers are disputing a position and into any corner, whoever's on the inside or the outside, whoever's defending or attacking should stay inside the white lines, should stay inside the track limits, and the other one should allow his rival the space to do that, whether it's the rival is on the outside or the rival is on the inside. This question of who's got the apex and who doesn't have the apex and whose front wheel is ahead of somebody else's mirror or somebody else's front wheel. You can. It really often depends on the angle at which you judge that. Whether you are at which angle you're judging at. I'm going to leave it at that. So, a broader, a wider, and easily understandable guideline, such as both cars should be inside the track limits while the maneuver is being executed, and each one of the should allow enough space for the other one to stay there. I think that's my humble opinion, is an example of the kind of guidelines that we should have. And in that case, then you have different panels of stewards at different events. Let's also not forget that the pool of stewards is rather small. I don't have the figures, but I think it's probably about 10 or 12 people that are the regular stewards for Formula One, and they are, changed on a regular basis. So you have those people that will be regularly used as stewards right throughout the season. That to me is the most practical solution, because you will not find people. And let's not forget, you can argue that there are staff or personnel in teams that do attend all 24 races. Yes, but they are paid to do that. The FIA stewards are not being paid to do that. It's not a paying job. It's a voluntary job. Yes, of course, their costs are covered, but they are not paid for this. It's not their job. So, again, how do you, unless you pay them, unless you make it their job, then of course you can maybe demand that they go to all 24 races, and all three of them could then be permanent, as far as I'm concerned.
Oh, well, that could work. I mean, if Formula One makes billions, why can't they pay?
Formula One makes billions, but the FIA.
Yeah, but Formula One is suffering because of these kind of things. Maybe Formula One should put it in the budget and pay for some stewards.
Employs them. FIA has to pay them.
If you can subsidize them, that's what I'm getting at.
Sponsors or somebody.
Sponsors, yeah. I mean, you can make a plan. I mean, it can't be that expensive. But the question I want to ask, I was listening to Jolyon Palmer on the F1 TV broadcast, and he said Aston effectively meant that the drivers have now, and they all adapted it in Mexico, but now the new max penalty sort of put that to the side. It's the fact that they race for the apex, and then you can do whatever you want to, because that's what Aston more or less told them to do. And he went on and on about that a bit, about the fact that it's sort of, it's just almost a stain on racing, if you want to call it that. It's not what you just said should be fair, and it should be hard but fair. It's now turned into a sort of a free for all to see who arrives there first, and then, like I said, he's got all the rights in the world to do whatever he wants, push people off the track, whatever, because he was first at the apex. I'm happy that these new penalties sort of put that to bed and showed now. Listen, the Aston president is actually not the correct president. Mexico is a great president. You should be racing in a way that allows your opponent space to compete with you fairly.
Yeah, and you know, it's also not something new. I didn't see the Jolyon Palmer bit. I often watch his, but I didn't have the chance this weekend. Everything happened so late. But and he's of course a former Formula One driver, so he knows his stuff. But yes, I mean, you know, the situation in Austin was basically a race for the apex, and you know, be damned what happened after that. If you are on the inside, you race for the apex, you brake as late as you possibly want to, and you go off, which is what happened to Max. And if your opposition is then on the outside, you push him off as well. And then he gets penalized because he gets a better line out of that off the track. Let's not forget that this basically happened in the Brazilian Grand Prix, or the Sao Paulo Grand Prix in 2021. That season was that acrimonious season for the championship between Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen, and when Verstappen was a serious contender right throughout the season, and eventually, obviously, very controversially won the title in Abu Dhabi. But that's a different situation. What happened in Brazil was that the two were battling, and Max did exactly what we have now become used to into turn 4, which is the one after that long back straight, the long downhill back straight shortly after the start, into the left-hander. And Max just exactly did the same thing. He was on the inside, Hamilton was on the outside, and Max braked so late and it went so wide in that corner in his defense of that position that Hamilton went off and was pushed off. And that was the first time, and Max was not penalized for that, but that was the first time that it really came about, that people started to see this form of defense. And it's been going on ever since, except from 2022 onwards. Of course, Red Bull was in such a position that Max was not ever really in a situation where he had to defend like that. Now he is, and now that is coming out again. And that's why things now need to be tightened up, I think, for the good of the sport. Again, I'm not anti-Max Verstappen. I'm not pro Lando Norris in any way in this argument. I'm just saying that for the good of the sport, we need to know that you can fight for a position, but you can fight fairly. You can fight hard. There can be touching, as far as I'm concerned. I've got nothing against cars touching each other, except, you know, purposefully pushing, crashing into somebody else. But banging of wheels every now and then. Motor racing is a contact sport. It happens. I have a very limited experience of that myself many years ago. It's a contact sport, and in some cases contact is simply a way of asserting your dominance over the opposition. It's not a way of pushing somebody off or crashing crashing into the opposition. So hard racing, good racing, as far as I'm concerned, is okay, but it's got to be fair. Stay within the white lines, whether you're defending or attacking, then I can't see any problem.
Let's talk about Lando. The fact that Max did what he did and was penalized for it, but stayed on the track, meant that Lando couldn't get past him and couldn't start chasing after the Ferraris. So there's a school of thought that maybe he could have won the race. But more importantly to me, what struck me is that McLaren chose to give Lando's seat to Pato O'Ward in free practice 1. Now, Lando needs to get used to the track. It's a challenging track, like you just said. It's got the least downforce of all the tracks. The cars reach the highest top speeds. The handling is difficult. The cars it's very high above sea level. Yet they choose to take away or give the car of the championship contender to a rookie, that they have to do it. It's compulsory. They have to give a certain amount of free practice 1s to rookies. Why would they have chosen Lando, for example, to do this and not Oscar Piastri? I mean, the stakes are too high. And there's a general opinion out there that says you could clearly see that Lando didn't have the amount of time to get used to the track, like Carlos Sainz, for example, did, and it showed in the race.
I think, that's the benefit of hindsight. I don't know why they gave Lando's car to him, why they didn't give it to Piastri. I have no idea why they did that. I don't think that had any effect on Lando's race, however. If you look at the way that Lando was able to attack Max Verstappen, be able to get past him on the hard tire, and the way that he was able to close in on the race leaders to such a degree that he forced Leclerc into a mistake and took over that second position, and then closed in on Carlos Sainz. No, I think the car was working, Lando was working. I think he had his mind was right this time. He was clever enough because he expected an attack from Max, which came, and he dealt with it. And he was able to race very hard towards the end of the Grand Prix. So yeah, I don't know. Whatever the reason was, I certainly don't believe that it had any negative effect on the way that he was able to handle his race on Sunday.
I think they were maybe preferring more to qualifying, that he could have ended up a bit higher. But anyway, because the cars had very limited running. FP2 was a Pirelli tire test session and things like that. So I didn't have all the time to get used to it. But anyway, it's just purely hypothetical.
Well, the thing is, at specifically that track, you don't really want to be in pole position. We saw that.
No, sure.
And we've seen it on many occasions in the past. Because the run to the first corner is so long, that means the guy who's in front just opens up the air for everybody behind him, and he gives they can get into his slipstream, and we saw 3 cars almost going into the first corner at the same time. So you don't, pole position wasn't that important at this track. It's more important on many other tracks, but certainly not this one. So even if it compromised, and in fact you actually want to be third, which is exactly where Lando was.
Yeah, 3 of the last 4 races was won from the third position.
Yeah, you get the benefit of the slipstream from the 2 cars ahead of you, and like Max did last year, I think it was, he was third if I recall correctly, and he went past both the cars ahead of him into the first corner, and took the lead and won the race. So that's actually where you want to be if you are Lando Norris, and that's exactly where he started.
Talk about Ferrari now. I mean, they seem to have a bit of a resurgence here towards the end. Suddenly, they're not chewing up the tires anymore. But more importantly, Carlos Sainz seems to have found his rhythm and his groove, and he's all cool, smooth operator, like you said. Actually made a call to the pit, so listen, can Charles back off a little bit? We don't have to push this hard. Quite a clever move, if you ask me. And now the question inevitably arises: do you think Ferrari might have a couple of regrets about not keeping him for next year? Never mind, we'll talk about Hamilton coming into the team just now, but losing a driver of the caliber of Sainz, the way that he's driving at the moment, with a car that's on the up, good or bad?
I don't think teams make a decision on who they're going to place in the car simply based on current form. That's a factor. Obviously, it is a factor, but it's not based on current form. It's based on the driver's complete capabilities behind the wheel, and that is based on his career up to that point. Are they sorry that they put Sainz in, or they let Sainz go and put Hamilton in his place? I don't think so, because I think Hamilton has got a far more proven track record as a race winner as Carlos Sainz. Let's not forget that last weekend in Aston, Carlos was nowhere close to, well, he was second, but he wasn't really a threat to Charles Leclerc. So things happened well. Things went well for him, for Carlos, this weekend, and congratulations, his second victory of the season. And I think, as he said, he wanted to win another race, which doesn't mean that he's not going to try and win the next 4 races, but he wanted to win at least one more race for Ferrari before he leaves, and that's great. I think that's fantastic. That's the kind of human side that one also would like to see more often, and he won in front of his mom. His mom was there for the first time seeing him win. Great, man. That's the human side. That's fantastic. Again, does Ferrari regret letting him go? I'm not sure, because I think they have a net gain in getting Lewis Hamilton there. Lewis has been a little bit quiet because the car is not quite working for him, but all signs are there. And, it's not like Ferraris, they all of a sudden, they had the upgrade from Monza, but they haven't been able to fully, get the benefits out of the basically a new floor. They don't have the problem of high speed bouncing or porpoising anymore that they used to have with the previous floor that they used. So things are now starting to work for Ferrari, and they are now starting to become, with 4 races to go and 2 sprints, become a very real threat for the championship, for the Constructors' Championship. I cannot quite see either Sainz or Leclerc. Leclerc is still leading Sainz in the Drivers' Championship, but I can't quite see any one of the two of them taking the driver's title. But Ferrari is certainly a very serious contender now for the Constructors' Championship, and that update that they brought, that big upgrade that they brought from Monza, is now starting to bear fruit. I think they are now quick in both short and long corners, fast and slow corners, slow and fast corners. They're not chewing their tires that much anymore. They're not bouncing anymore. And I think the next 4 races, we are certainly going to see a very strong performance from Ferrari. Let's not forget, and I worked this out, with the Constructors' Championship, at this point, Ferrari is, 29 points?
Yes, yeah, 29.
29 points behind McLaren. With 4 races to go in the Constructors' Championship, there are still 206 points on the table. So any team, I would argue, amongst those top 3 teams, can still win the Constructors' Championship. The caveat for Red Bull is, of course, that they need Sergio Perez to also score points to be in contention. That is the arm that is bound behind their backs at the moment. And we can talk about Perez in his situation, but the other 2 teams, both Ferrari and McLaren, can score with both their drivers, and on any given day, they can have a 1-2. I think McLaren can, and Ferrari can clearly have a 1-2. The Red Bull cannot have a 1-2 at this point. So 206 points up for grabs for the next 4 races in the Constructors' Championship. It's absolutely doable for Ferrari to haul in McLaren and to take that lead and to win their first championship since, 2008, I think it was.
Yeah. All right, now, you mentioned it. You brought it up, Sergio Perez. We not all of us. I expected him to be announcing his retirement in Mexico, sort of home race, and everybody was happy, and there was a lot of goodwill. But he stuffed it up. He had a terrible weekend. I mean, he stopped out of his box on the starting grid. That is such an elementary rookie error. And he didn't cover himself in glory during the entire race with the back foot from the start. For a home race that could potentially have been his last home race, for that matter, he did extremely poorly.
I have no doubt that it's his last home race, and I feel very sorry for Sergio, because we know things, when things go wrong for him, they go wrong in a big way. I mean, it started to go wrong in qualifying for him. So he wasn't able, and he said the car brakes don't work and he cannot stop the car and all kinds of things. But the fact is that Max has exactly the same car. And Max can make it work. And I think, I've often said it on the broadcast that the car is actually where Sergio is, excepting for when he makes mistakes, of course. But as far as performance is concerned, that's where the car is. Max is just able to get so much more out of that car, which is the sign of a world class, a world champion driver. That is Max Verstappen. So his situation, the dilemma that Red Bull has, of course, is what do they do? If they fire him now, a lot of people are saying that it's possible that he could be let go before the Brazilian Grand Prix or the Sao Paulo Grand Prix next weekend. I can't quite see that happening, but before the end of the season, there's a 2-week break between Sao Paulo and Las Vegas. That's possible. But what does Red Bull do? I've asked this question before. Do they replace him with Liam Lawson? And what guarantee do they have that Lawson will be able to score them the points in the Constructors' Championship that they need to? I think that picture has slightly changed since the last time I made this argument, because Liam has now had 2 races in which he certainly showed that he's capable of delivering. And I think he's starting to become more and more of a real possibility for that team. Whether it's before the end of the season or definitely for next season, I think those are 2 separate points. But Liam Lawson has certainly showed that he's not willing to stand back to anyone. And it was ironic, wasn't it, when he and Perez had to fight for the same position. And Perez actually got off the worst between the 2 of them, because there was damage to his car because of that. And Perez was clearly, I think Lawson has certainly got into his head. There's no question about it. The way that Perez complained about Liam afterwards just showed to me that he's completely rattled by this guy. He's absolutely convinced probably that this is his biggest threat for his seat in Red Bull. And that is getting to him. And that's probably the reason why he's making such silly mistakes. Liam, maybe you shouldn't show the middle finger, but we've seen that enough times in Formula One. I think that's absolutely no problem, because it's heat of the moment stuff. And he actually did apologize afterwards. But yes, I think the dilemma for Red Bull is that they've got to replace Perez, but with whom? And if they do replace him with whoever, will that person be able to deliver what they require? Because they need the points. They need somebody who can challenge at the front, can finish on the podium at the very least, if at the same time Max wins the race. So they need to want to. That's what they basically need in the next few races to be able to get back into the lead. Again, 206 points up for grabs. If they get somebody, if Liam Lawson gets that seat, and if he becomes a podium contender along with Max, yeah, that's possible. They could come back to the front.
The general consensus, I think, and we've spoken about this before, is probably that Perez is going to get his marching orders at the end of the season. Not before the end of it, but by the end of the season. And Lawson will slot in there. That leaves a space open in V carb for now. And there's sort of it seems to be a story emerging that Franco Colapinto will probably slot into there. But this weekend, Peter Windsor, our esteemed colleague, raised the possibility of Red Bull maybe talking to Carlos Sainz and Williams, for Carlos Sainz to slot into the position next to Max, and Colapinto staying with Williams for now. It makes a lot of sense in the sense that, like you just said earlier, Sainz is now a proven race winner. He is a smooth operator. Much better, much closer to Max as a race winner, for example, than Perez was the last couple of seasons, for that matter. What do you think of that theory as a matter of interest?
Well, first of all, I respect Peter Windsor a huge amount. I mean, I know that he's been involved in various roles in Formula One since probably, if I'm not mistaken, the 60s. He was also involved as a team manager at Lotus at some point in the 70s, I think it was. And he's been a Formula One journalist for many, many, many years, a very highly respected Formula One journalist. I've had the pleasure of meeting him on a few occasions. We had a few chats, but not in depth at all. But no, this guy knows what he's talking about. I did not see that piece, so I don't know what he based his opinion on. I would assume that he probably has some grounds to say that. There might be some of his sources that have indicated that that's a possibility. So I'm not going to say it's impossible. I'm certainly not going to doubt Peter Windsor's wisdom on this. Although I will be very surprised it actually does happen. Carlos Sainz and Max Verstappen was very explosive as a combination when they were together at the Toro Rosso team. And I'm not sure that it's a good idea to put them together again. Both of them are now either a world champion and or a proven race winner. Put them together in the same team. I'm not sure that that's a good idea.
And the fathers.
And you got the two. Absolutely, I didn't even think about that. And you got the two fathers, in the same team. A highly combustible combination, I think, as well. So I'm not so sure about that. I do think that Carlos Sainz Jr. Is at Williams because he took a very long and thorough view on the future of the Williams team, and he certainly does see the potential of Williams becoming competitive within the next 5 years. And that's one of the, if not the main reason why Carlos Sainz decided to go to Williams. To accept their offer, because he's seen what they are planning, he's seen the projections of the future, and he's convinced that that's a good idea for him. He might not be a race winner for the next 2 or 3 years, but he might well be a champion inside the next 5 years with Williams. I think that's his thinking. Colapinto back to Williams as a driver. Well, obviously, if Red Bull comes with some kind of an offer that James Vowles cannot refuse, to bolster the coffers of the Williams team, That's a possibility. Franco certainly belongs in Formula One. There's no question about that. He does belong in Formula One, and somebody should give him a race seat. Well, that's probably going to be I don't like the name VCarb. I call them RB. But anyway, let's hope that he actually gets the second seat at RB next year when Liam Lawson goes to Red Bull in the place of Perez. I think that's the most elegant solution probably for the whole dilemma at the moment.
The remaining seat then is Sauber. I've got a theory again that I'll put to the test in the next week or two. Is I think Perez is going to end up in Sauber or Audi for that matter. And Bottas is going to go return to Mercedes, looks like as a reserve driver or something. But I wouldn't be surprised if Perez ends up in Sauber. A lot less pressure. He started off in Sauber way back when he was still a graduate of the Ferrari Academy, if you remember those days. I think he's going to sort of, ride off into the sunset in the Sauber team, get them to where they want to be, 2026, maybe still be there, and then maybe call it a day.
I'm going to argue with you, but I'm not going to argue because I don't think you are right, because who knows? But I would argue that Perez's mind is probably not in Formula One anymore, and to pair him next to Nico Hülkenberg next year at Sauber, I think that's going to do him in even worse. I think the best thing for Sergio now is to simply drive off into the sunset and go and do sports car races. He's quick enough. He's a proven Grand Prix winner. Go and do sports car racing and go and win Le Mans for whoever. I think that's probably the better solution from Sergio Perez's point of view. I'm not saying that I know him. I'm not saying that I've got any particular insight into that, but the way I read the situation is I think his mind is completely done for Formula One, and put him against another very competitive and competent racing driver like Nico Hülkenberg at Sauber. I don't think that's such a good idea, but who knows? I mean, again, I'm not going to say it's not going to happen, but I will be very surprised if it does.
Who do you think is going to end up there? Is Bottas going to stay on, do you think?
No, I think it's probably a realistic possibility that he could go back to Mercedes as a reserve driver, and I really hope. I'm not saying it's going to happen. Who can say that? But I really hope that Franco actually gets that seat, because that's a proper race seat. And again, he's young enough. He can afford 4 or 5 years of building before Audi gets competitive. And at that point, he could race there. Although at RB, that's not a bad possibility for Franco, and maybe Sauber then decides, look, we're going to keep Valtteri there. He's got the experience. We need the experience of both Hülkenberg and Valtteri to build our program as soon as possible and become competitive as soon as possible. So I think it's probably a better idea from the Audi point of view to get 2 experienced drivers in there to help them along.
All right. Next up is Brazilian Grand Prix, another sprint weekend, like you mentioned. Lots of action expected there. Like you mentioned, that turn 4, Max's old stomping ground. We'll see if it happens again this weekend. It's going to be a lot to look forward to.
Absolutely. That is one of the most brilliant events you can possibly attend as a spectator or as a journalist. I was there on 2 occasions, 2 very interesting occasions in 2006 and 2007, and both races were unforgettable for various reasons. So it's a brilliant event. Often the weather plays a role. I haven't seen the weather forecast for that part of Sao Paulo. Sao Paulo is such a big city. You can't just say, what is the weather forecast for Sao Paulo, because it differs from area to area in that city. So the rain could certainly. Last year there was a huge thunderstorm that blew away a lot of the infrastructure. In fact, damaged a lot of the infrastructure there. So those sort of things happen, and that always has an effect on the outcome of the weekend. Whether it's the practice session, the one single practice session, the qualifying, and the sprint race, and the race itself on the Sunday. So this is one not to miss, especially with the current situation in Formula One, the battle at the front, both the drivers and the Constructors Championship. Do not miss this one. It's at a more reasonable time for us this weekend. So, early evening or thereabouts. So certainly something that one should not miss. I cannot wait for this one.
Right, Hendrik. Thanks, man. It was fun as always.
Talk to you again.